Things just took a major turn as we have multiple huge lease updates to go over today surrounding a couple of key players that has fans fired up. But things have taken an interesting turn surrounding the situation following a report from Darren Dreger and others. We're going to break all that down in this episode, folks, before we get into it. If you're a part of the 71% who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content. Your guys' support has been absolutely unbelievable. So thank you guys for that. And we are on the road to, of course, the big goal of 25,000 subscribers. Thank you guys for continuing support over here. There's a lot to go over today, and it's been a lot of conversations about Mitch Marner, all these different players on, Patrick Kane, Jonathan Taves, all these different guys. But one name that has continued to pop up is Brad Marchand and Sam Bennett. And we have a brand new report that dropped from Darren Dreger revealing some interesting information that he's either going to have fans happy or a little bit upset, depending on what side you are. But this is recent here. I missed this yesterday, but on Overdrive, Darren Dreger said he's been led to believe that Sam Bennett simply doesn't have any interest in signing in Toronto. And what a very interesting turn here, because for a while it seemed that the Leafs' number one priority was not necessarily signing Sam Bennett in particular, but there was rumblings about the Leafs being interested in Bennett to replace Mitch Marner, all these different things. And we do have some other reports, so lending some credence to some Brad Marchand and things like that we'll dive into in this video. But as for Sam Bennett, it seems, according to Darren Dreger, so take it with a grain of salt, that the Leafs at this point aren't interested. And I think I know why, and it has to do with the amount, which we'll get into in a minute.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a second. Of course, Darren Dreger, we know, has, a relationship with Darren Ferris, the agent of both Mitch Marner and Sam Bennett. But by all accounts and all reports, and it's not just Darren Dreger saying this at this point, Sam Bennett does not want to leave the Florida Panthers. So I don't think he's going to leave the Florida Panthers. Now, there is a world where they insult him with their contract offer, which will come after the season ends. Obviously, they're on course to possibly win a Stanley Cup at this point, obviously in the middle of a Stanley Cup final tied with the Edmonton Oilers. But I think it's going to be very interesting because, again, if they insult him with a contract offer, maybe he does go to the open market. But we heard that if he does go to the open market, the only team he would be interested in would be playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And it doesn't sound like he has any interest in leaving Florida. So I don't think he's going to leave the Florida Panthers. It would be an interesting idea to add him to the team because, of course, he's not going to make anything crazy like 12 million or even 10 million, like was reported with another team wanting to offer him that. He'd make a little bit less. He can offer, some goal scoring, point production, all of that. Of course, he's leading the playoffs. He's been unbelievable in this year's playoffs, but the thing that makes him most effective, I don't think he could get away with in Toronto. We saw that in game 2 of the Stanley Cup final. He's just not going to get away with that as a Toronto Maple Leaf. So it's a fun idea. I just don't think it's going to happen at this point. And honestly, I don't think it's the best fit either. I think the Leafs can go out and get a couple guys that will make a difference still, that are just different than him, and their play styles are different. And we're going to touch on one in this video as well.
Yeah, and of course, it's also interesting to note that you mentioned he's in the middle of a playoff race right now, and if they win the cup, it would make more sense for him to stay. Most of these guys don't leave, but also, even if he decides to leave Florida, we heard there was some mutual interest. Of course, we know he's from Canada, Toronto, all these different things, so it'd be interesting there. But on the flip side, Pierre LeBrun came out a couple days ago and said Sam Bennett and the Panthers haven't been close in negotiations. He may stay, but there are believed to be teams willing to pay $10 million per. And this has been a report ever since the offseason started. I don't think the Leafs are one of those teams, but there are other teams that are in need of either A, a player who can be a superstar in the playoffs, and B, they have some extra cap space. And I think for the Toronto Maple Leafs, one of the reasons they're going to be on the outside looking in, if it ultimately goes that direction, is because of the $10 million. They don't have $10 million to spend on a guy like Sam Bennett. Even though he would fit the team perfectly, you're better off going on some of the other guys, which we've been discussing on this channel. We'll continue, to discuss there now. And it's very interesting. And let us know down below, do you want to see them stretch the budget for Sam Bennett? I mean, he has more playoff goals, or the same amount of playoff goals this postseason than Mitch Marner has his entire career with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and entire career in general, of course, being with the Leafs his whole career. But this is also an interesting one, and this is JD Bunkus talking about the pushback to potentially signing Sam Bennett. There's a lot of people who want them to go over that amount. If he were to leave, I'm stunned at the number of people who would have made David Clarkson comparison, weirdly living in a state of fear about overpaying for Sam Bennett. Clarkson was never Team Canada's best player in a best-on-best tournament. In a final against the United States, he didn't lead the playoffs in goals. So what are your thoughts on this? Of course, talking about the David Clarkson comparison, whether that's fair or not, but also the overpay. It would be an overpay at $10 million. There's no doubt about it. I mean, $10 million per is a bit of an absurd number. Cap's going up. The Leafs do have the money to pay him if they want to, but then of course you run the risk of, I guess, his lack of production in the regular season, and then hoping that it remains in the postseason, and of course him being surrounded with players that allow him to excel in Florida.
Yeah, we've heard that there's at least one team for sure that would offer him $10 million. It sounds like there could be multiple teams. The Leafs are not one of those teams. That doesn't make any sense. The Leafs right now have about $24 million in cap space. It could be a little bit more depending on what happens with David Kemp, Calle Yarncroc, a couple other guys. But keep in mind 24, 26 million, whatever it is, whatever it ends up being, you still have to sign maybe John Tavares with it, definitely Matthew Nyes with some of that. So, keep that in mind. So it is still going to be an overpay, I guess, if you want to call it that, for Sam Bennett. But, like you saw in that image there, he's not the same player as David Clarkson. David Clarkson was a huge overpay for a guy that, did have a decent playoff that year and obviously went to a Stanley Cup final. But this is much different. Sam Bennett is a much better player and has proven it at different points in his career and different levels as well. So he is a better player. And I think if you were to sign this player, he would make way more of an impact than David Clarkson ever did. So I don't get that comparison, but I do understand, not wanting to overpay for a player who's not going to score you a point a game or anything like that. Right. So it's going to be interesting. But again, I still think there's other players on the market that can offer similar things in their play style.
And what this means now is their focus, we assume, is going to be on Brad Marchand. And of course, you see here, I mean, we know how good Brad Marchand is. And also, quickly to tie up the Sam Bennett thing, here's the full quote. Feel free to pause and read it on the details from Darren Dreger about why he doesn't want to play for the Leafs. Basically goes on to say, it's not because of the noise in this market. I'm not saying that. It's just that he's going to have a lot of options. If he hits free agency, 20-plus teams could be interested in how he plays. And of course, he points to the challenges Toronto faces in acquiring the kind of players they want, which I guess to a degree that's the case. So they also seem to get a lot of the players they want too. Obviously, John Tavares, some of the guys like that. So it's interesting there. But at the same time, I think the bigger issue will be the number of teams that are willing to pay him a lot of money. But again, this focuses now the turn to Brad Treliving, focusing in on Brad Marchand, who, of course, I mean, we know how Brad Marchand has had a couple of goals in the playoff game there. I mean, the Stanley Cup Finals game. He is a playoff performer. If you want to get somebody that is similar to, Sam Bennett in some ways, at least if you compare him, playoff performance, they're both very good playoff performers. This could make a lot of sense. We know, or we seem very confident, these reporters, that he won't be returning. Brad Marchand, that is, to Florida because of the price, and it was always going to be a rental. Ultimately, they gave up a first-round pick for him. It was the second that conditional that got changed to a first once they got to the third round. Marchand now becomes a lot more real, and I think that this would be the avenue I would prefer to go, as crazy as it sounds, just given the fact that he's a very good player, arguably better in some ways than Sam Bennett, but you'd also have much less risk and a lot less downside for signing Brad Marchand simply because of the length of the contract of Sam Bennett.
I think this is the avenue, like you said, that you want to go down if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs, first of all. And I think the player too. And what I mean by that is Sam Bennett, at least by all the reports, strikes me as the type that wants to stay somewhat comfortable and wants to stay in Florida. He knows it's working and he's comfortable there, and that's where he's found his game. So that makes sense. Brad Marchand at this point isn't going to stay with the Florida Panthers. They have a cap crunch. It's not going to happen. He's going to go somewhere else, and where that is, I'm not sure. But he strikes me like the type that likes a challenge. And, everything that he said out there in the media over the years, like this is a guy that likes the challenge, likes that spotlight. The lights are never too bright for him, and that's the type of stuff that Brad Treliving was talking about. So adding him, who is quite literally probably one of the best playoff performers, at least amongst active players at this point. And I know he's been in the league a lot longer than some other guys, but he's fantastic. He has the right mindset. I love the way that he plays. Totally respect him. I talked about it in a video before. Like, you can hate what he does on the ice and the fact that he always beats the Leafs, but he's a great player and always gets the job done. And I can respect that. So, if he was to join the Leafs, that would be changing the DNA a little bit. And I know he's a little bit older, but you can still go out and sign some younger guys as well. We're not saying to sign everybody who's out there that's over 36 years old, of course, but I would like Brad Marchand. He's proven, and he's proving it again this year, that he still has it, especially in the playoffs. He's been one of the best players for the Panthers, maybe their best player throughout the playoffs. So he's been fantastic. And I think that, depends what the contract looks like. Scotia Stat Projections has him at like 4 or 5 million, but I think that it's probably going to come in at like 7-8 million, something like that. It really depends where he's going. And if he wants to take a pay cut, depending where he's going, if he wants to go to a contender. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I would love Brad Marchand on the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, of course, shorter contract because of the age of Brad Marchand. Sam Bennett's projected, 6.4. That's going to go up to 10. That's where these cards sometimes start to devalue, I guess, because of the way the cap's going up, because of the amount of teams that are interested in the player. But let us know down below what your thoughts are. Things are getting interesting, and we're going to keep you up to date with all the latest news. You guys are going to be. Thank you guys for watching. See you later.